So I work as part of our partner network in the DevOps segment. And so what I focus on is helping our customers that are going through kind of DevOps transformations and look at how our partners and how AWS technologies can help them. And this is a big change. And DevOps and cloud and microservices, all those terms get thrown around, and you oftentimes think they're kind of really different things. And what I would say is it's all kind of one modernization journey. It's something that you're typically doing all together, and it's something that's, I'll point out, we at Amazon went through some years ago. And I think it's one of the key factors in our success. When you look at all the new things that got presented this morning, if you look at everything else that's going on out there, the pace of innovation that we're going through, it's because we're set up to work in this way. And I want to talk a little bit about how we got there, but then the other side of this is there's dangers as well. This new way, microservices way of building software and organizing yourself, it optimizes for change. It makes it so you can change more quickly. But the problem is that there's negatives too. Your applications get, the world is set up for great big things like this ship, and then we have these new applications that are made up of all kinds of small pieces with teams behind them. And these things are hard to understand and they're hard to debug. And so what I want to share a little bit is some of our experiences in working in this way, that we're overdoing it for a long time. And it's not easy, it's hard. And so one of the worries I have right now is we're on a giant hype train with Kubernetes and containers and microservices in general. And I see a lot of organizations kind of jumping into this world. And I'm happy for them to do that because it is where you need to end up. But I kind of want to tap the brakes a little bit. I know this is the wrong place to be talking about tapping the brakes, okay? But you've got to be ready for this. I have a concern that a lot of people are building microservices applications that aren't ready to run them. And that's part of what I want to talk about. So let's forward here. Just a little bit of historical perspective. As I mentioned, Amazon went through this transformation from a monolith application. Amazon.com was a giant Perl app with relational database backend. And back in the 2001 to 2003 timeframe, it's an enormous monolith. So we went through what a lot of organizations are going through today, but we did it back then. And it took, I would say, 3 to 5 years, as it takes most organizations that amount of time to make this full change. But what we've gone to now is a complete organization of teams supporting microservices. And we were DevOps before people had the term DevOps, and we were doing a microservices architecture before people spent a lot of time talking about microservices architectures. And our famous thing is the two-pizza team. We had teams that were composed of the number of people that two pizzas could feed. And I remember seeing that and thinking, wow, I'm a two-pizza team. but actually, typically it's less than 10 people. That's kind of the idea. And our entire organization is set up that way. These small teams building their own little black boxes that all interrelate to one another. And what that does, as I mentioned before, is it optimizes for speed. It optimizes for change. The problem is that navigating our organization, as many of our partners will attest, is hard. And understanding everything going on in these applications and debugging them and changing them is a challenge as well. So, real quickly, you often hear this term monolith nowadays, and it's become this sort of general statement for all that is bad. And it's not really true. I mean, I've been working on monoliths most of my career, and it's just the way we did things for a really long time. There's a lot of great software and great systems that are built in a monolith style. It's just not optimized for rapid change. That's the problem with a monolith. You typically have to change the whole thing at one time, replace the whole thing to get things, to make a change. And so it doesn't mean poorly designed. It just means the traditional way that we used to do things. And as you look at your monolith, it's very rare that you want to just completely blow it up all at once. You want to incrementally change it over time to get to something new. So a little bit about microservices. And here's two of the best people possible to give the definition. Two thought workers, which I used to be. I'm a prior thought worker as well before joining AWS. But as Martin Fowler says, it's a style and approach that's mostly focused on doing things in one process, in its own process, of communicating via lightweight mechanisms. Something very small, something easy to change. And then Sam Newman, who is one of the other people that's done a lot of things to define them, talks about it as being independently deployable services. The independently deployable is how you make it easy to change. You can replace a microservice, everything else still works. And usually around a business domain. And we want to get back to this. I've been in the industry for a very long time. I came from a lot of object-oriented kind of stuff. And microservices are in some ways a return to that, in that microservices should be focused around business domains. The only way to make them understandable is to make them such that they reflect real things that you already understand. So, where are we with AWS now? It is, here's the funny thing. If you look at the architectures of many of these new systems that are being built out there, Netflix or lots of others that are out there, they all end up looking like this. They all look like Death Stars. These new architectures for microservices. It's lots and lots of small things all communicating. They're single purpose. They're connected only through APIs. The general API has ended up being web kind of interfaces, HTTPS, and they're largely black boxes to each other. And what this enables is different languages used for different things. It enables, the teams are responsible for how, but the what they actually provide, that's available to everybody else in the organization for what they do. So another thing to talk about that you got to realize, and this kind of goes to the DevOps thing again, is that kind of our older style of developing where everything was in sync doesn't really work, because really every single microservice is on its own schedule and doing its own thing. So the big changeover to Agile, to DevOps, to microservices is getting, you're doing smaller things more frequently, everything on its own schedule. So you don't want a whole organization that all does QA at one time. You want one that's always doing QA. It's always doing testing, always doing developing, always doing deployment. And so sort of a staggered thing with each service having its own schedule and its own ideas is the idea. This thing doesn't work. So a little bit about kind of modern applications. The ways to think about them really is to, one of the big things about DevOps that, I did Agile consulting for a long time, and the thing I always remembered there is the happiest people in every Agile transformation I ever worked were the testers. And it wasn't because, a lot of test empires got broken up, because the testers ended up being a part of the development teams, but they were way happier because, huge surprise here, if the testers are involved from the beginning of a development process, you make more testable code. Big surprise, okay? So DevOps has the same thing. If you get operations involved from the very start, you build software that's easier to operate. If you start thinking about security and thinking about compliance, if one team is dealing with all the requirements all at once, then you're able to build better software, is just basically. This whole idea of handing off to somebody else to take care of a different concern is just too slow nowadays. You need teams that can do everything, and that doesn't mean you need teams of supermen and superwomen. It means that you need teams that are supported by the organization. They're allowed to give them the security knowledge that they need, give them the compliance knowledge, give them the product knowledge that they need. And so that's the challenge. How do you build teams that can have responsibility for end-to-end delivery, but have the support of the whole organization? So this kind of whole monitoring and logging issue, as I talked about with these kind of new applications and new systems, monitoring and logging is no longer, I think for a long time having a really good APM solution like New Relic or various others that are out there, that was kind of a great, nice to have. I've been in systems where we added APM and it made a huge difference for us. I think with these new systems, these new microservices systems, if you don't have comprehensive monitoring and logging in place, you can just forget it. There's no way you're going to understand what's going on. There's no way you're going to be able to deal with things. So we at Amazon, at AWS, we have a whole suite of different logging and monitoring types of solutions, and on top of that, New Relic has a whole suite that add to it and make it more powerful. And I would just say that it's a critical part of what you're doing. As we said here, this software is part of your app. It may be the only part of your app now that's not just business logic anymore. Maybe the only part. You got to make sure you can monitor it and understand it and add to what's in there. By the way, if you get a chance here at reInvent, I don't know if it's already happened or not, I don't think so. Tim Bray is giving a talk, who's a well-known software engineer now with AWS, is giving a talk on modern applications that some of this slide is from, and you guys could go to that talk if you get a chance. It's really good. So a little bit, I'll just finish up with a little bit of kind of microservices advice, generally. As I mentioned before, you don't have to break down your monolith all at once. If you have a well-defined domain, you don't have to do it all, entirely broken down. Be willing to leave some things as they are, and then just build the new things that you need to rapidly change. Don't use a Big Bang approach. It's an evolutionary journey. Look at what are your bounded contexts. What are the areas that microservices fit into that all are around one business domain? You've got to work to make your application understandable. Think about debugging this later. And what are you going to have? How are you going to? What are you going to have to help you? So modeling your microservices around business capabilities is important. And then leveraging messaging services. What I'm finding quite often is having messaging services to communicate between each other, not just pure HTTP, but to use an actual messaging queues and whatnot, are a great way to better build more understandable applications. As I mentioned before, comprehensive monitoring, not optional in this world. You've got to have it in place. And the other thing is get help. New Relic and a lot of our APN, I work a lot with our APN systems integration partners. They're people that have already been working with applications like this for a while. It is a new world. Get help from some of these folks. Okay? That's it. Happy to answer any questions that anybody has.